10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
What's going on, everybody? It's episode 47 of Your Brain On.
God.
We have Chris Anderson with us. Chris has a quite unique journey of faith, growing up essentially in the Mormon church, a part of it for almost 30
plus,
almost 30 or more than 30 years, where he went on mission with the Mormon church, was a leader in the Mormon church, and kind of goes through his own deconstruction and questioning of Mormon practices and rituals and ordinances and beliefs and history that led him to now be at our church. Somehow he got here, but there's been a lot in between that. But we dive deeper into the hurt caused by that and deeper ideas about church hurt. So it's going to be an amazing episode. Enjoy part 1 of episode 47. Enjoy.
Okay. Well, Chris,
Yes.
why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah.
So just an overview, who you are.
Who I am.
Who are you?
Yeah. I don't know who I am.
Trying to figure it out still.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, I'm 54.
Okay. Yep.
I've had quite a journey in my life, spiritual journey, to places high and then very low. So
Yeah.
I am trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to figure out, to answer that question, who God created me to be. And if I think you can figure that out in life, then you have a purpose. And with a purpose, nothing will stop you if you have a purpose. So I'm trying to figure out my purpose at 54.
Yeah.
It's a little late, I know.
No.
But better
You're in
late
good
than
company.
never.
Better late than never.
Some people figure it out early in life, not me. I've been kind of going different ways. So
Yeah.
we'll get into some of that, I'm sure.
We'll get into some of that. Well, what
But,
about
I'm married. I've got a beautiful
yeah.
wife, Jenny. Just love her. She's changed my life.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing woman. Yeah, I love her very much. She's always said, "I'm God's gift to you for as a reconciliation," and I didn't always believe her because I didn't always believe in God, but yeah, she is a gift from God.
Wow.
So.
That's a good sign. Whenever you tell someone about your wife, you start getting choked up. Something's going right there.
Well, yeah, it is going right. I believe it is. So
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful.
yeah, she's just an incredible lady. She married a non-believer and somebody with faith. And it's not that I tried to tear down her faith, but boy, I challenged her faith, and she held very strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of respect for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Kids?
Yeah, together we have lots of kids. We're like the Brady Bunch.
Okay.
We mesh 2 families. I have 3 children of my own, 3 kids. They're beautiful children, and they're doing various things. One's a teacher right now in Colorado. The other's in graduate school at Georgia Tech. And my daughter is just a beautiful daughter of mine is 20. Sorry. She was born in 2002, so she's 20, maybe 21. It passed her birthday. So she's 21, and she works at a rehabilitation center for people who have fallen victim to drug and alcohol. So,
wow.
Really?
yeah. And so it's like
They all sound to be doing solid work.
they're all doing different
Georgia
things.
Tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're all like trying to figure out their way in life, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So 3 of your own. She brought her
And
own
she
kids.
has, Jenny has 2 children from her previous marriage who still live at home with us. So I'm doing my best to kick them out. Sorry, kids.
And how old are they?
No, they're 21, and the other one's a senior in high school. Goes to the local high school here. So they're great kids, actually. I'm always on them to clean their room, but they are good kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you passionate about? I know that you said you're trying to find your purpose, but is there any hobbies you have, things that you light up your heart?
Gosh, no.
No.
I don't go fishing anymore or play golf anymore. But what am I passionate about is honestly just I think people would have described me. You guys won't view it this way, but I was probably viewed as a big introvert. But I don't think that was me actually, because I'm really discovering people are enjoyable to be around, and I enjoy people from different backgrounds and different diversity. And so my passion right now in life is, it's going to sound corny, but kind of helping people.
Yeah.
Figure out things. And I like to read. I like to challenge. So
Like to think.
I like to just, I don't know. Stripping away that you think you know something, and learning you had it wrong is a great lesson, because it allows you freedom to explore everything without having a bias.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for me right now, at this point in my life, I'm trying to figure out God and spirituality, and so that's occupying my time quite a bit.
Yeah. And over the course of the last 9, 10 months that getting to know you, you have an insane curiosity, and I think that is a gift that you have, your ability to be curious and to ask questions, meaningful questions, questions that get to the heart of things, that identify the purpose of something. You ask really, really good questions, and I've seen your passion come out in that, trying to discover things and understand something.
The reason why that is because I spent so much time not questioning, and then you find out you're so wrong on something.
Wow.
And it like shakes the very foundation you're standing on, and you start questioning yourself. Like, I used to say I knew a lot of things, like I'd profess testimonies. I know this, I know that, or no, you were a little bit wrong. So when you profess you know something and you find out, well, you were wrong, that really shakes your foundation. So we'll get in. I'm sure we'll get into this. We'll get into this.
I just want to let you know that I haven't had many one-on-one conversations with you, so this is a privilege for me to finally get to sit with the man that Daryl brags about all the time, because pretty much we meet every Saturday, and we podcast pretty much every Saturday. And most Saturdays,
I better start listening to the podcast.
Well, we don't talk about you on the podcast.
Well, we don't talk to you.
No, but I better start listening if I'm on it.
No, I'm saying in our conversations, like at a coffee shop, he'll say, "I got to meet with Chris, and I'm so grateful for that guy." And so there's something about you, obviously, and we're going to get into your story that makes your faith incredibly authentic, and where you're at right now, even, in the midst of, trying to figure out who you are and all this stuff, especially with what you've gone through, it makes it super authentic. And I think not just Daryl sees it, but pretty much every guy I've talked to in the men's group is like, Chris Anderson. Mr. Anderson.
When you spend so much time being unauthentic, and then when you look in the mirror and you realize you're unauthentic, that's what's driven me to be authentic. I can't live that way, right? You can't live a life of being, and we all do it. But I had to make a decision, like, just be who you are, and let the chips fall where they go, right? So just be authentic, and it was a struggle for me. I spent many years not being authentic. And so it's being authentic. So.
You want to jump in?
Yeah. So when I met you, Chris, it was the weekend. It was during a church service, the weekend after our Christmas services, I think so. It was a first kind of standard Sunday church service that we were having after we had our Christmas services, sometime early January, start of January. and you walked up and you had a friend with you, and I was out by the coffee stuff, and we were getting coffee, and I just like said hi, started talking to you, and we introduced ourselves. And you had mentioned that, you know, you were newer to church stuff, like coming back to church. You haven't been for a while, because I probably asked you, hey, how long have you been coming to Centerpoint? You know, and you were like, this is my first time since Christmas. I just came last Christmas, and I decided to come back. And I was like, oh, awesome. Was glad you're here. And then you're like, so I have some questions about about what you guys do and believe around here.
Wow. I don't even remember
you
that.
You jumped straight into it. The first thing you asked me was, do you speak in tongues? Do you believe in speaking in tongues? And I was like, yeah. I was like, do you speak in tongues? I was like, yeah, I speak in tongues sometimes. And you're like, okay. You're like, I've got some questions for you.
Wow.
You're like, maybe not right now, but maybe we can talk later. And so right away, I knew that you were an inquisitive person, and that you were on some kind of journey of discovery. And I use the word audit because you used to be an auditor, or right?
I was an auditor.
You were an auditor, and
I worked for some of two of the largest. I won't say their names, but they talk about the big five. I was with two of them, and we did financial audits looking for fraud. So.
Yes,
I would design, procedures to find out if this company is if their financials are fraudulent, and so that's actually played a role in my
faith
journey.
Yeah.
Oh yes, because, absolutely.
Yeah,
and that's what I was about to say. Whenever we started to meet up and get coffee, and then I found out you had previously been an auditor, and that was part of your job was to find fraud.
Yeah.
And to ask questions and to dig in and to see what's really going on. And that made so much sense, because it seemed like that skill that you had developed, you were now taking to faith, into religion, into beliefs, and you were trying to figure out, well, what's real, what's not real, what's true, what's fraudulent, what is worth trusting in, what's not worth trusting in, what is the thing that matters at the end of the day. And you had all these good, very, very good questions to ask. But before then, and now today, we've been having coffees and having conversation over this whole year.
I drink a lot of coffee,
and it's but they've been been awesome, and to be able to see kind of the journey that you've been on, even of processing, and the questions that you ask and the answers that you find on your own and through community. But we want to jump into kind of all the stuff that happened before what you had alluded to already, of what happened. What was your church experience like before I met you? And what was that journey like way back when? And when did it start? And what happened? Because we're talking about church hurt in this podcast. And I've had the the privilege of hearing a lot of your story. And I think it's something that a lot of people can probably relate to in different ways. And so we'd love to jump into your story. Tell us about your church experience in general. Kind of give a bird's eye view first, and then we'll jump in.
Which one? Which church? Boy, I've visited a lot of churches over the years. So maybe we start at the beginning, maybe.
Yeah, let's do it. We can jump into the beginning.
Probably my first church experience was at the Catholic Church. My family was born Catholic, or I was born Catholic in a strong, I would say, strong Catholic family. We weren't this, CEOs, Christmas and Easter only. We went all the time. I had my first communion, age 8. I've got several brothers. We're all very close in age. We all went over to the catechism, I think they call it, on Wednesdays, where you do your studying. And my grandparents were Catholic, and my mom and dad were Catholic. They got divorced when I was 2. And we lived with our mom and my 4 brothers. There's 5 of us. And we were Catholic. And that ended when I was young, but we converted to Mormonism. And I guess my first church hurt, if that's what you call it, is when we left Catholicism. We got completely abandoned from, the Catholic Church, our family. Nobody wanted to talk to us anymore as soon as we left the Catholic Church. And that was our close family. We had cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents, and it was like all of a sudden they're all gone. Like nobody would talk to us. So,
And that was when you were how old?
I was 9.
And then all of a sudden everyone just stopped. And you were just like, where'd all
In
the
fact,
family go?
I'll give you a little story. I hadn't seen my grandpa. I mean, we saw him all the time. He was this great fisherman. And all of a sudden we convert to Mormonism. And of course, a 9-year-old doesn't understand family dynamics very well. So I'm sure there was a lot of discussion at the parental level that I wasn't part of. But I remember several years later, I hadn't seen my grandpa in many, many years, and I'm at the grocery store one day, and I think I was like 16 or 17, and I recognized his car, and I went up to him, Grandpa. And he got my name wrong.
Wow.
Steve. I'm like, no, this is Chris. Man. And so I invited him over to our house, and he came, actually, he and my grandma. And but we really didn't reestablish much of a relationship with our grandparents, and it's because we converted to Mormonism. And you know, there's teachings in the Catholic Church about if you're Catholic and you leave, and you know, so there's church hurt there because our whole family structure got torn apart.
Right.
And a single mom with 5 boys needed that structure.
Yeah.
And so that's what Mormonism provided. A neighbor invited us to the Mormon church, and I think they felt sorry for my mom. She worked, and we were like the neighborhood gang going around.
All the boys.
Yeah, there's five of us, and we're all 1 year apart. So they were busy Catholics, right?
Yeah.
And so we were like just the clan that would go around destroying the neighbors, and we could spend hours talking about how destructive we were to our neighbors next door. Like literally, you know, they have this big white wall that was a 2-story house they had, and we would throw berries at the very top of it, or shoot them with slingshots to the top, and all of a sudden, you know, well, who did that? Well, it wasn't us, right? We're the ones next door with the berry tree in our yard. But yeah, so we needed some structure, and I think the Mormon Church did help out financially, and so that was an easy conversion, and there was five future missionaries there, so
wow,
we converted, and my mom and all of us converted to Mormonism.
And you think that's because of the financial help that they gave you? And have you had any conversations about that, like about why you guys went to Mormonism?
No, but yeah, I can tell you, a single mom who didn't have a college education. She did what she could to put the food on the table, right? And so the Mormon Church did. It was a positive thing that they did. It attracted my mom, and I think my brother was 14. So what 14-year-old really?
Right. Where do you fall in the
4th out of 5th?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the 4th.
Yeah.
So we convert to Mormonism. Yeah. So.
And then
wow.
And then there's a whole lot that happened.
There's a whole lot that
we
happened.
were faithful Mormons. I mean, we all went on missions. We all got married in the Mormon temple. We'd walk into church, 5 boys, and the show that was put on was real. We were like, oh yeah, 5 missionaries, and we all got married in the temple, and so
starting out. Sorry, go ahead.
And the temple is separate from the actual church where you guys meet for church on the weekends.
Yeah, they have the local chapels, which you see dotted on the corners of a lot of street corners now. But the temples are separate and are more. It's where you do the important ordinances. The important stuff happens at the temple, but the common parishioner, you don't have to be a member. You can go into any church on a corner, a Mormon church on Sunday, but you can't go to the temple unless you are deemed to be a worthy member of the church. And so you have to be worthy to go to the temple.
Yeah.
Who's worthy?
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
He just drops little tagline.
Who is worthy?
Who is really worthy?
Okay, so when you first started out in Mormonism, were you passionate about it? Did you care?
I was 9.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember them asking for my baptismal interview, why do you want to be Mormon? And you know what I said? Because everybody wears a suit. That's a 9-year-old, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know any different. So.
And that was enough?
Well,
were they like, okay?
Honestly, I converted because my family was converting. I didn't know any different. It wasn't. It was yes, it's supposed to be a personal choice, I assume, but I essentially feel like I grew up Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
So if you grow up in a faith, do you ever really choose it? At some point, you may. Depends on the faith. But for me, Mormonism was. I don't say I was really Catholic, even though I was born into Catholic and I did my communion. My spirituality started with Mormonism, I would say.
Yeah.
And then by the time you went on a mission, were you more involved in the church? Did you realize why you were doing it, or was it just kind of by rote? You were kind of.
Yeah, I went on a mission to Honduras for 2 years when I was 19. And you go and you don't come back for the 2 years. It's not like you have phone calls or weekly. It's changed now, but back when I did it, which was in '87, you go for 2 years. We got to call home on Christmas and I think Easter, your family. But other than that, I'm hiking the mountains of Honduras trying to convert people. So
wow.
I did that for 2 years. I came back, got married within, I think, 6 months of getting back because I was told to, really. We can get into that. But so I get married, and I start out the Mormon life. You see them on TV, the commercials, right? The happy Mormon family. That was me, right? I'm getting married. A couple years later, start having kids, had 3 children, and I did the Mormon life. So I went to church every week. I became an elder. I went to the temple more times than I can remember, and was living a worthy Mormon life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was you were there for how long?
I probably officially left when I was, let's see. Wow, I can't even remember. I'm getting old. Let's see. I was probably 38. In my late 30s, I left.
Right.
So I don't remember exactly, but I left in my late 30s.
You left in your late 30s, and you were 9 when you started.
Yeah.
So almost 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
So most of my adult life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were part of the Mormon Church. We can jump back into those, but then after late 30s, you decided to leave.
Yeah.
And
that was a big deal. Yeah, that was a big deal.
Yeah, and that must have been a big deal.
That was pretty hard.
Yeah.
So, what made me leave is your question.
Yes. So now
you didn't ask it, but I'm going to ask
jump into. Yeah. So what were some of your things that happened that caused you?
Well,
I
actually, my son was getting ready to be baptized. So he's 8. You get baptized at 8.
Okay. Every kid does.
Yeah. That's the age, they call it the age of accountability. That's when you know right from wrong. So they don't baptize before 8. So I was getting ready to baptize him because that's what dads do when you're worthy. And so I was a worthy dad, and my son was getting ready to be baptized. And I remember I walked through the living room and I saw on TV a guy being interviewed named John Krakauer. And he wrote, he did a documentary on climbing Mount Everest. And he was doing a documentary on these 2 brothers called the Lafferty brothers. And actually, now there's a Netflix, you can go to Netflix like right now, and they have their story on Netflix. So it was really amazing that I actually just saw it the other day. But back then, he was being interviewed, and he was saying these things I'd never heard about Mormonism. I was like, what? And I was just walking through the room, and they're talking about Mormons. Of course, I stop and listen.
The TV was just on.
I can't. Yeah, it was on. I think my wife was watching.
Okay.
I can't remember that part, but I remember it caught my attention, or I actually was just on, and I walked through the room. That I do remember that, because I stopped and I listened and I listened, and I was like, "Whoa, these are things I've never heard before." And he was being interviewed because he was doing a documentary on these two brothers, and the whole documentary was going to be on why did they slit the throat of a family member in the name of God. And I was like, ooh, that seems interesting. And he was talking about how in his interview that his story is not about these two brothers. It was about this history and culture of the faith I was in. And that was like, oh, no, that's just anti-Mormon literature, and I'm not supposed to even read this stuff or probably be listening, and I'm going to have to go confess to my bishop. I'm listening to this show, but I decided to order his book.
You did the
boom.
I should have been watching this. I'm going to have to confess, but I'm going to get the book.
The rest is history. No, but
that is so.
Here was the problem. I was hearing things for the first time, and I'm like, I've grown up in this church. These are lies. This guy, why is he lying about the church that I've never heard this stuff. And it was scary. The internet was just like coming out back then. The internet was this is the time the internet was going. So I did a little looking on the internet, and I'm like, this isn't sitting very well with me. Some of the things this guy's saying. And I actually thought, well, he's just another anti-Mormon, but the problem was he had nothing to do with the Mormon church ever, really,
right.
When I found out, and I studied a little bit about who he was, and I found out, well, he did this documentary about climbing Mount Everest, and I like the outdoors, so that kind of appealed to me to read his book. But I started to read his book, and I started having some difficulty with the material in it, and so I was like, And it was like, if 1/10 of what he writes, or 1/20th of what he writes, if there's any validity in any of it, I have a problem. And so I began a journey. I'd just gotten laid off work, and I had a bunch of free time. I was fortunate to get a severance for a while, and so I had all this free time on my hand. I'm like, I'm going to dive into see what this guy writes and see if there's any truth to any of it. And the more I dug in, the more I had a problem. And the pressure was mounting because I had an 8-year-old son I needed to baptize. And I started having these issues with what I was reading. And the biggest issue was it was always hidden from me. How could I be a member of this church? How could I go on a mission? And how could I be a faithful member? I went to the temple all the time, and I was like, this doesn't sit well. What am I going to do? And the more I read and the more I studied, I started reading things outside the church, which really isn't allowed. To go to the Mormon temple, you you have an interview with your bishop before you go, and he has to pronounce you worthy, basically. Imagine that. Yeah.
And that was every time you went to the temple?
Well, they do it once a year, and you get this little credit card size piece of paper that basically pronounces you worthy.
Wow.
That's why I
Is
say.
that the language they use? You're pronounced worthy?
Well,
that's what it feels like.
Well, that's what it is. That's what it's for. He's a judge in Israel, allegedly, and you go and have a one-on-one interview, and he asks all kinds of very personal questions, and probably not for the podcast even, but one of them is, do you read any outside materials that are contrary to the church? I'm summarizing. I don't know the exact wording, but they have a list of there's 12 questions or 15, I'm not sure, but one of them was this. And I was like, I'm going to even have to lie to the bishop now that I'm reading materials outside the church.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So how am I going to baptize my son? And so I became just this, I was an auditor. So I'm like, I apply my skills that I've learned to my daily professional life. But when it came to God, I stuck them in a closet somewhere. And I'm like, I'm pulling those out. And so I did. And I started investigating, and I started reading and learning about the history. And of course, I read materials that weren't published by the Mormon Church. So that became a problem. And at first I was looking, to discredit it, because my whole social network, my whole way of life was Mormonism.
Right.
And so I didn't want to go down this path. I didn't want to have it be untrue. I didn't want these things I was learning to be valid. So I was like, I'm going to discredit this guy. But I was open enough to read, and I started learning and reading different books that I wasn't allowed to read. But they seemed like they were coming from people who had either didn't have an issue to create, like John Krakauer. I don't think he set out to discredit Mormonism. That wasn't his goal. He found it fascinating, and he did his documentary. And so when I'd read that stuff, I was like, whoa. And then my world comes crashing down, because I start asking questions. I'd go to church, and I'd sit in the back, and I'd raise my hand, and I'd ask a few questions, and people give you a couple of weird looks. I'm like, who's this guy? Yeah, he's questioning. Not allowed.
Which you're not allowed to do.
Yeah, you're allowed to ask questions, but if you start asking questions that show a weakness in your faith, people are going to start questioning you. And like, no, you got to be strong in your faith, right? And it's part of the theology for Mormonism. Mormons teach that we all can become God, and we will become gods if we're worthy enough. Yeah, that's why I use that word, worthy.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you remain faithful and you're worthy, based on your works, you will become a god yourself. And so, to me, I questioning became a big deal. So I'd sit in church, and I'd go to Sunday school and the other things. And I'd start raising my hand in the back. And the more I raised and the more I asked, the more I realized, I'm not getting good answers here. And that became a problem, because then it made me dig in more. And pretty soon it was, okay, you better go talk to the bishop, right? People are telling me, you asked too many questions. Why don't you take them to the bishop? And so I did. I sat down with my bishop. I'm like, Bishop, I've been reading things I shouldn't. Well, you're not supposed to do that. Yeah. Well, why? Why can't we read something? Right. I mean, truth stands on its own, does it not? Right. So I brought my concerns to the head guy, right? He's my bishop. That's who you're supposed to take it to. So I can respect the idea that I was asked to go to the bishop. But he didn't have any responses, and that was a problem for me. So then it was like, oh, now where do I go? Right, yeah. Well, you go to the next person, the next higher up authority. That's your stake president. And he's the one all the bishops report to, right? For your local bishops. There's 5 or 6 of them. They'll report into a stake president, they call it. And stake president is just over an area. It's a wider area. So
it's like it might have,
it's like you might have 5 or 6 chapels, in an area, and he would be over all of those. They call it a stake. Okay. And so I would, I started realizing no matter who I asked, I'm not getting answers. And these are things that are basic answers. It's not doctrinal answers. It was about the history. So, for example, you're told how the Book of Mormon comes about, and Joseph Smith, they call it the first vision. And he allegedly sees God and Jesus. Well, that's a great story. I taught that to people in Honduras, that Joseph Smith saw Jesus and God the Father. And in Mormonism, they're separate beings. Okay, so 2 beings came and appeared to Joseph Smith. The problem was that story evolved over time. If you go look, there's multiple versions written by Joseph Smith that they don't talk about the multiple versions. They only show the one that promotes the doctrine as it is today. So if you go back and look at the first vision and you look at what's written, you're like, there's multiple versions. There's like 7 or 8, or somebody told me the other day there's 9. I don't remember how many there are, but it didn't sit well with me that this story seemed to have evolved. So I'm like, ooh, that's a question.
Right.
So let me go ask, hey, can we reconcile this?
Because you were actually trying to reconcile.
Yeah. I didn't want to lose.
Right.
You know, the Mormon faith. If you leave, there's no written rule, but you're going to be cast out, and you're going to lose everything. In fact, when I was questioning so much, one of the things the bishop told me is, if you continue down this path, you'll lose everything, including your family. Well, that's scary, right? Nobody wants to lose their family. And all my brothers were Mormon, my friends, my network, everything surrounded my the faith. So me questioning this became an internal struggle I did not want to do. It's like very difficult to start questioning and realizing, well, in fact, there is a teaching. If you leave and you've been through the temple, or you're I'm going to be cast out with Satan's, in outer darkness, they call it. That's their version of hell, outer darkness. And so that's where I was headed if I continue down this path. And the first thing is you lose your family and your friends, and I did.
And that was threatened.
You call it a threat. Yeah, I guess in a way it is. But for me, it was like just...
Even if it's a spiritual threat, like God's going to take this from you or something like that.
Oh, no, I was going to be cast out. And just coming on this podcast, it has consequences to me. Somebody passed me a note once in church when I asked a question. They said I was a son of Satan. Right.
Wow.
So,
in the church service, they passed you a note saying you are a son of Satan.
It was my last church service.
Wow.
Which is a story in of itself. Mormons once a month have what's called a fast and testimony meeting. And this is just an open mic. You get to get up and you're supposed to share what you know to be true. And you can fit 8 or 10 people. It's an hour, 15-minute meeting, but you sing your song, have their opening prayer, and then they turn it over to the members, and you can just get up. I mean, I think they still do that. I haven't been in a while, but
maybe you changed their policy.
So this is a time when I was I'd been studying for almost a year, and I had all these questions and nobody could answer, and I stand up in front of the congregation. Yeah, that didn't last very long. I was about, I'm telling them what I'm learning. This is what I'm learning. I'm reading books, and I'm like, has anyone looked at this in this congregation? Can somebody help me reconcile what I'm learning? Because this is new information to me, and it's stuff that's not found in your Sunday school lessons. Yeah. And so I felt the church had hid it and was covering up their past. And that is always a red flag to an auditor or something.
Can you talk about some of the things that you were learning?
Yeah, it's the first vision has multiple.
Right.
They have additional scriptures other than the Bible, right? You have the Book of Mormon. They call it the Pearl of Great Price, which is another set of scriptures, which is amazing. They have the writings of Abraham and Moses. They're actual scriptures, they claim, were written by them. So this was one of the big things. How it came into the hands of Joseph Smith, and I'm not going to do it justice trying to describe it because I'm going to do it a really short version, but Joseph Smith, a Egyptian mummy exhibit comes through his area in the 1800s. I don't know what year it was, 1830 something probably, but early 1830s or 40s. And back then we couldn't translate Egyptian, or it wasn't well known how to translate it. So Joseph Smith, somebody buys the exhibit, and underneath the mummy's head that they bought, there's all these scrolls stuffed underneath. And I guess they pull it out as the story goes. And oh, Joseph Smith, he brought forth the Book of Mormon, which was translated from a language called Reformed Egyptian, whatever that is. but he can go translate these for us. And so they bring him over to Joseph Smith, as the story goes, and sure enough, he can translate them. And so they give it to him, and he says that this is nothing but the writings of Abraham and Moses themselves. And so they made it into scripture. It's called the Pearl of Great Price. And
that's still used today.
It's still used today. It's part of their 4 canonical scriptures. And it's the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Revelations of Joseph Smith himself. So that's their canon, if you say, of scripture they use. And so this is a big deal, right? And this is the writings that we read about Abraham in the Bible and Moses. So this is like critical. It's like fundamental. Like, you know, either he translated it and they have these writings, which would be amazing to the Christian community, or it's a fraud. It's one of the two. You can't get around it. So, well, the problem is the writings Joseph Smith translated, and the manuscripts got lost. Okay, from the 1800s. And so happily we go along and we now have the writings of Abraham, and there's no way to verify it because the manuscripts are gone. Except for they showed up in the Chicago Museum one day, 19-something, mid-half century, like 1950s. I have my dates wrong, but that's not important. But they show up. And the manuscripts get sent out because we can now translate Egyptian.
Right.
And they get sent out to some of the most renowned scholars, okay, at big universities, you know, people much smarter than me. But it went to independent to like 6 or 7 well-renowned Egyptologists. I don't know their names. You can look it up, and the story's well documented. And the problem is they all came back independent with the same translations, and these are nothing more than funeral texts, prayers that the Egyptians would stuff in the mummies for the afterlife, which makes total sense, right?
Right.
And boy, that was a problem for me, that these texts have been translated by scholars, and it has nothing to do, like zero to do with Abraham and Moses. It's just, and they used to have these pictures of these manuscripts on display at BYU. I went to BYU, by the way, for a limited time. I finally left. But while I was at BYU, you could see them. And, you know, at the time, that was like, oh, wow, these are the actual ones. And they since don't display them, I think, anymore. But, yeah, it was a fraud. And so I was like, this is a problem for me. My faith, you know, now what do I do? I'm learning things that are like, now it's questioning the fundamentals of my faith. And that was hard because it started come crashing down. And you pull out one card and the whole house falls. And I remember one of my brothers, I call him up. I'm like, hey, bro, I've been studying some stuff. I know I'm not supposed to, but I really got to, like, share it with you. Like, who am I going to go talk to and share this with? Like, there's nobody. If I go to my bishop, you know, I know he doesn't have an answer. And if I talk to a non-Mormon, that they don't know anything about this. And most Mormons don't even know about how their own scriptures came about and the problems with them. And so, hey, bro, can you look at this with me? And literally, I was told I had the devil in me and not to ever bring this up again or we wouldn't be brothers. Now, we're very close to this day, and he's no longer Mormon. But at the time, it's the mindset, right? Yeah. And so that was hard for me. I went over to his house, and he was married to somebody. He was married into the Joseph Smith line. He himself was like a descendant. It was like a brother, great granddaughter of Joseph Smith's brother, I think, was his wife. But anyway, when I went over to their house and sat down, like tried to show them, you know, like, you get out, you're never going to talk about this again. And if you do, like, I disown you as a brother. And I was like,
Wow.
that's heavy. And so that's the mentality. If you leave, you lose everything. And I just was questioning. And the more I questioned, the more it became more questions. And the more questions became more questions. And
And you had
it's
nowhere
never
to
stopped.
And you couldn't even talk to anybody about it, because anytime you talk to somebody, they either told you to stop asking questions,
Right.
or you're going to be
Yeah.
excommunicated.
Xed.
Right. Which is one of the characteristics of a cult,
Yeah.
is to shun anybody who's outside of believing the same thing you're believing.
Yeah. So that was difficult. So, crisis of faith, it's like we were the perfect Mormon family. Right.
Right. And then you're internally going through
because they're all
these
perfect.
questions.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, no, I wasn't going to be baptizing my son. And when I made that decision, and the reason why I'm like, I can't baptize my son because I'd be making a statement to him.
Yeah.
Right? That this is truth. If I'm going to baptize my son, that's making a statement to your son that, hey, this is the way, this is right. And because you would be teaching him the faith by doing that. And so because I had some doubts, I'm like, I'm not going to baptize my son. And when that became known, it was continuous exit. And finally stood up in that church one day at the fast and testimony meeting and just started talking about all the different things I was learning. And I even asked, I said, I'm happy to meet somebody, not over coffee, because, Mormons don't drink coffee.
Are they really not allowed to?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there's
No caffeine at all, or is it?
Well,
Wait, so you didn't drink coffee for...
I'm
until
making
you
up for it now. So my wife's like, "You going to the coffee shop again?" I was like, "Well, I'm meeting Daryl today. I mean, Raul tomorrow. I mean, this guy." So yeah, and all I do is drink coffee. No, yeah, you can't drink coffee. It's one of the rules, right? To be worthy. See, Mormons teach you become God yourself, and yes, I'm sorry to my dear Mormon friends, they do teach that God lives on a planet named Kolob and has God wives, and we will progress ourselves to become a God. And it's only if you adhere to the teachings of Mormonism and you do the ordinances in the temple, and can you go and become a God yourself.
Yeah.
And so... I was giving up a lot. I was giving up becoming a god by leaving Mormonism.
Right. But by that, when you're in it, you're believing it, and
I believed
it's scary to question it and to feel like you're going to lose all of that.
Nobody questions. That's the problem, right? Because you're frowned upon if you question, you're just, yes, you're allowed to ask questions, but only to a certain point. The reality is only to a certain point.
Right.
And if you start asking the deep, hard questions, you're going to get booted pretty quick. And I got booted. I mean, the bishop told me to sit down during the fast and testimony meeting. He's like, your time's up. I'm like, oh, no. I just got a few more things to say. So I took the rest of the time. And then when I sat down, I got passed a note that I was a son of Satan. And so.
Man, talk about being hurt by people in your church even. And then, I mean,
just for presenting stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
It goes beyond that, because once I did leave, and by the way, I had to get an attorney to leave and write a legal letter. Yeah.
Why?
Why did you need that?
Well, Mormons love to excommunicate people who don't align with them. And I just felt, you know what? I don't want to be excommunicated from a church. This isn't a moral issue. It wasn't like I had done some moral thing wrong. This was I can't find the faith in the doctrines and the history that I'm learning. And so I'm like, I just best I remove my name from the church records. And so I had an attorney. Back then, they made it easier now because so many people have left. But back then I needed to get an attorney and wrote a letter to to the church offices and said, remove my name and the name of my family. And so we did. I still have the letter today.
Wow.
And I have their response. And in the response, it says, guess what? You go down, you're now out of the church, and all the blessings of the church are removed. So they wanted to scare me again, which is basically I'm not going to become a god myself any longer.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Being a god, I think, would be too complicated.
I don't want to be a god.
No.
I don't want.
That's a lot. That's a lot
Yeah.
to
So
handle.
it was hard, but I'm making light of it. But this was such a mental anguish for me to go through this, and to realize like I'm giving everything up. Like this is everything. Like the world I knew, all my friends, family, just completely ostracized. And so you're left, doubting, am I doing the right thing? Am I really like a follower of Satan because I'm questioning and this no longer sits well? And they had me convinced I was actually for a long time. And it's a psychological warfare. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, manipulation, some control there.
But you have to be a worthy temple to become a god, and the temple in and of itself is just was so traumatic. I mean, we haven't even touched on. We could go on for hours.
Can you talk about some of those, maybe some of the things that you've where you experienced those traumatic things? And we've been talking kind of about the theological things, or even the validity of what you're believing in and the life
There's so
that
much
you're living.
more too. I want to say everything. I want to know about the history of John Smith, because I know he wasn't necessarily a very good guy.
Who, Smith?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, he wasn't. Well, I mean, I'm sure he had his positive moments, but he ran for president. He wanted to be president.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, Mormons teach that they'll be the head of the church will lead the world, and their prophet will. So Joseph Smith wanted to become a president, which I think would fulfill some prophecy if he did or something. But that's not the important part. But yeah, Smith, polygamy, right? Oh, polygamy. Do Mormons believe in polygamy? It's always the question.
Right.
Do they really believe in polygamy? Now, when I was a Mormon, I remember I worked with this attorney. And she was a non-Mormon, and she was I don't even remember what faith she was, but she kept saying, "You Mormons, you guys believe in polygamy," and she knew I was married to one woman, and I'm like, no, we don't believe in polygamy. But I knew I was lying to her because I was so ashamed of the teaching. I was like, I'll cover that one up. And I'll cover this teaching up because they didn't sit so well, yet I had to believe it. And so when I talked about being authentic, it's like, that's inauthentic, right?
Right.
And so I've lived so inauthentic because I've always had to cover up things. And polygamy is one of those. So do Mormons believe in polygamy? It's the big question. And so what they say is, well, we don't practice polygamy right now. But if you read the Revelations of Joseph Smith, it teaches polygamy is like an eternal doctrine. And it's why they instituted it. And if right now it's been the need to follow polygamy is not required, but it's required for salvation.
Polygamy is required for salvation.
If you read Doctrine and Covenants, it is.
Wow.
Yeah. The Revelations of Joseph Smith. And how polygamy came about and how it was removed is an interesting story in of itself. It was Utah wanted to become a state, and they were practicing polygamy, and they wouldn't allow it unless polygamy was denounced. So all of a sudden the prophet has a revelation. Oh, now polygamy is no longer. Yeah.
Whoa.
Is there always a core prophet at the top?
Yes.
It's very organized, the Mormon church.
Oh, it's probably the most organized church I've ever witnessed. Yeah, I think it's more.
And all of them do the same thing, like every Sunday. It's almost like a lectionary.
Yeah, I mean, they may even be more organized now. At least back then, like every Sunday it was coordinated. So you work out of the same book no matter which church you went to. They have their manuals, and you could go to one church and they're going to have the same manuals as the one at the next church. And so you'll be learning the same thing worldwide. It's very organized. Yeah. It's one of their strong points, I guess, for a church. If you like organizations, I don't like church organizations anymore. But
that actually is part of the way that they maintain things, maintain control.
Control is the word. Control.
One of the other things I looked into cult behaviors recently was ideological purity, and that is you have to always be believing the same things. And if you're not believing all these things, then you're in the wrong. You're sinning. You're out. You can't be a part of this.
You're a son of Satan.
Right.
Yeah.
Cast out to outer darkness.
It kind of makes people like, it doesn't allow you to be human, which you're saying you can't really be authentic in that space, because it's like, I bet you 500 more people, I don't know how many people were at that meeting, but 50% of those people have had those thoughts before, but it's like, can't have that. You know what I mean? Like, or have experienced, some sort of, is this real, or is this, like that kind of aspect? I mean, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, you had an experience that caused you to change your belief. Whenever we form beliefs, we're not aware of the process that's taking place, or even the beliefs that we have, until a belief is confronted. And then we have to figure out, wait, is what I'm believing correct, or is what this new thing is that correct? One of these are wrong, right?
Yeah.
And not everybody has those experiences where what they're believing is directly confronted, or they're put in an experience where now they have to discern between two different options that seem to be opposing.
Yeah.
But you had that, and you didn't look for it. It just happened.
It happened multiple times. I mean, you asked Aaron, like, well, what were some of those? Well, blacks in the priesthood. I mean, you guys hear about Mormons are racist, right? And you watch their TV commercials. They're very diversified now. But, wow, that was a big deal for me. Blacks in the Mormon church, if you were black, and think of the populations of people that are non-white, and what's a black person versus somebody else. I don't know where you start drawing skin color changes, right? If you're not white, that doesn't mean you're black. But in the Mormon church, blacks were not allowed to hold the priesthood. Well, okay, that might not be a big deal to somebody, but guess what? You need priesthood to be saved and be with God. So by not having the priesthood, they can't go through the temple. And if you can't go through the temple, you can't do your ordinances that are necessary for salvation. And so by default, just simple logic, you put on the auditor hat. We have a problem here. How do they get, that God will take care of that. But the reality is blacks were not allowed to have the priesthood till like 1978, I think it was. And I think there was a controversy over...
It's very recent.
Yeah, very recent. But it was after the civil rights movement. And what ended up happening is, God doesn't change, right? And so if blacks can't have the priesthood, then all of a sudden in 1978, when I think it was San Jose State would not play BYU in football, and all of a sudden there's this big controversy about blacks and Mormonism, and then a new prophecy comes out by the prophet, or a new revelation, excuse me.
And this is by like the head person of the church, of the Mormon church.
Yeah, so a new revelation comes out, and all of a sudden blacks can now have the priesthood, and I guess BYU can now play San Jose State, right? So to me, it was like, well, wait a minute. Revelations are coming for convenience. And if this is truly a teaching from God, why is it changing? And it's a teaching that actually never sat well with me. So when I did my research, of course, you always focus on the areas that don't sit well, right? Well, this was one of those. I talk about that attorney who asked me about polygamy. She also asked me about blacks, and I wouldn't answer her truthfully because I was so ashamed of my own church's teaching on it, and it didn't sit well with me. this is these are the non-Sunday school lessons, right? That blacks were in the pre-existence. They couldn't. This is unofficial, but they couldn't. This is how it was explained to me, by the way. They couldn't decide if they were going to follow Jesus or Satan. And so God marked their skin as a reminder. And they were born through the lineage of Cain. That's like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, seriously?
Yeah. So it's like a curse almost for being on the fence.
That's exactly what it was.
Wow.
And then you're like, well, maybe I misunderstand that, right? Well, let's talk about the indigenous people of North America, that the Book of Mormon allegedly is their history. Okay.
Yeah.
And, well, as the story goes, this family came over from Israel, like 600, it was before Jesus. They populate the North and South America, and the family's, I guess, kind of Caucasian, I don't know, but they were white and delightsome, I think is how it reads. And then they have this big war. I'm really summarizing.
It says they were white and delightsome.
Well, we'll get to this. It doesn't say that anymore, but it used to. If you go to the original manuscripts of the Book of Mormon, it describes this war that took place, and that God basically turned their skin from white to dark to remind them of their iniquity.
Wow.
And that's, I don't know if that came with like a snap of the finger, but how all of a sudden do you turn their skin from white to dark? And that's in the Book of Mormon. Now, my understanding is in the original manuscript, it says white. It described them, they were white and delightsome at one point, and then God turns their skin dark.
Wow.
As like you say, it's a punishment or a reminder. Which if we study any history, if we actually study the history, we know that is wrong. There wasn't a white and a dark skinned group of people. That's just made up.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So these things didn't sit well with me, and I'm a son of Satan now.
Yeah.
For rejecting these things. And the list goes on. I mean, we could spend hours.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just scratching it. There's teaching after teaching that's disturbing. And I say disturbing because these are really fundamental, disturbing teachings that actually influence the way you view people. Mm-hmm. And that's my problem with religion in general. Mm-hmm. It teaches us by default, what we subscribe to in our doctrines make a difference. We just think it's some small theology, but actually it changes your mindset. Right. And it can, in my case, I always battled, right? I mean, I had black friends.
Right.
How can they be bad people, like, cursed somehow? That doesn't sit well. Or, polygamy, that doesn't sit well. And so these things don't sit well, but guess what? You just ignore it. Like, how could I go on a mission then? Because you just ignore them, right? So, yeah,
yeah.
But the temple's is extraordinary itself. Let me share with you what it's like, at least back in 1987, what it would have been like for a female to get married in the Mormon temple. Like, this is like,
I'm nervous. I'm really nervous.
I'm the one who should be sweating, and your hands, I can tell you're wiping your hands.
At one point in Chris's life, he took oaths that he would never share anything that happens, and it's like, I think we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
I love breaking oaths with you, Chris. I love watching you break oaths.
We're gonna break an oath today, probably. No wonder why my first marriage failed. Okay, literally, here's the wedding ceremony. If I put myself in my first wife's mindset, So it's the most best, you've been looking forward for your whole life to get married, right? I think she was 20. I was 21. There's a reason you get married young as Mormons, but we'll get to that maybe later. But this is your wedding day. Now, you've sent out all your invitations, right? You do that 6 or 8 months ahead of time. You invite your closest family and friends, and of course, if you're going to go to watch the actual ceremony, you have to be Mormon with your little temple card that declares your worthiness, right? So think of this is your wedding day, and you're showing up to the temple. You've waited your whole life for this. And going to the temple is a big deal in Mormonism. This is like the culmination that you've kind of arrived for salvation. You do your temple ordinances, and it's like you're on the right path. You're headed to the celestial kingdom, and you can become a god yourself. So you show up, and the first thing they do is they have you strip down and put on this poncho type thing, and you don't have like underwear underneath. It's like weird. I was like,
is this for the wedding ceremony?
Oh, yeah, because you have to take out your endowments. If you're female, if you haven't gone through the temple, you would do it your first day, the first time you go. It's called washing and anointing. Mm-hmm. Now, they've changed it because they got too many complaints. But back in the day, you just wore a poncho. This is what I did. And so you go into a dressing room, and you change and have this poncho shield over, and you're naked underneath. And as a female, men are a little different, but a female to have somebody like touch you with oil on parts of your body that are underneath the poncho, that would be like weird for me, especially as a female. And now this is your wedding day, yes, if this is the first time you're going through. And guess what? You don't know this is what's going to happen because nobody tells you. There's no preparation. So you show up, and you really don't know it's they say it's sacred, but it's secret. Like, they won't tell you ahead of time because you can't talk about the temple outside the temple because, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But so imagine that. And so you get through that traumatic thing, and it's not like they're having sex or anything. That's not what it is. But they're pronouncing eternal blessings on you, and they'll touch you like on your forehead with oil. They'll go underneath the poncho, and they touch in between your thighs. They're not molesting you, but it's just an uncomfortable thing. And they touch you in various parts of your body, and they're pronouncing blessings, and they'll touch your feet and your knees. And so underneath, I don't know where they touch on the women, to be honest, but I remember my wife saying it was uncomfortable at the time. Yeah, it was uncomfortable. But you get through that little ceremony. That's probably 20 or 30 minutes. And then they have
20 or 30 minutes?
From start to finish. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of waiting.
Okay.
But anyway, by the time you get to the temple, it's 30 minutes in. Like, you've shown your little card to the guy at the front, the gatekeeper. You got to present that card that you're worthy.
It's like Costco.
And if you don't have the card, you can't get in.
No,
the temple.
You can't get in. You go and you do the washing and anointing. The actual washing and anointing is maybe 15 minutes.
Okay.
All right. But then you go into this big room, and it's, in my case, I remember my wedding day. It was, I'd already been through. Okay. But at the time, my wife hadn't. So you go in this huge room. It's like a big auditorium. And there's everybody's there. All your friends, your family. Okay. So you're in a big room, and this is your wedding day. And so you proceed to this ceremony that's extremely confusing to a first-timer. Like, you really don't understand anything. But I remember going, and now this was my first experience, but just think if this was your wedding day, that they have you take, at that time, they were blood oaths. You're like, well, what do you mean by that, right? No, like literal blood oaths. Like you promise, you make a series of promises, and as part of the ceremony, each time they're like stages, and they have representation of your worthiness and what you're going to do. But I remember the first time I did the blood oaths. Now, this is if it was my wedding day and I was a female and I hadn't been through the temple, which is extremely common, this is what they do on their wedding day. And it's you like literally bring your arm to a square, and they have you repeat that you make these series of promises, and then you agree to penalties if you break the promise. Well, what's the penalty? The penalty is, like on the first one, you actually take your hand and you motion and you slit your throat from ear to ear. And you agree to have your throat slit and your tongue like pulled out of you. I think I don't remember the exact wording, but it's your tongue is torn and your throat is slit from ear to ear. Jeez. That is the penalty if you break the first covenant that you make.
Which is what? Do you remember what
I don't remember.
Were you promising in that moment?
Okay, I'll just read it to you. I'm glad you asked. Now this is where, like, you realize that by even talking about these things, that I'm like literally a son of Satan to them. So
not to us.
It says, this is what I did. Like, we and each of us covenant and promise that we will not reveal any of the secrets. Now, that's their word, not my word. Secrets of this, the first token of the Aaronic priesthood, with its accompanying name, sign, and penalty. Should we do so, we agree that our throats will be cut from ear to ear and our tongues torn out by our roots. As part of the ritual, each individual participant draws his right hand, palm down, up to his left ear with the thumb extended, and draws his right hand quickly across the throat to his right ear, motioning the slitting of one's throat and having one's tongue ripped out by its roots as a penalty for breach.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds demonic.
So I'm sitting there.
Dark.
Yeah.
Here's the problem, though. The first time I did it, I looked around, and who's standing next to you? Your brothers, your parents, your friends.
Right.
Now, if this is your wedding day.
And you're doing that publicly?
Oh, yeah.
Whoa.
Like, everybody does it.
Wow.
You have the entire 1,000 people in the room are all doing this, like almost like robots.
Oh, doing it together.
Yes, but it's an individual thing.
Yeah.
So you're taking the covenant and the penalty individually, but you're in a room with 1,000 people and they're all doing it at the exact same time.
Does everyone from the churches come to your wedding? 1,000 people. That's a lot.
No, it's other people are getting married that day, so there's just multiple people, and so I have probably had maybe 40 or 50 people that day at the most.
So they'll have multiple weddings in the same sessions?
Yeah,
kind of thing?
well, you go into different rooms and get married, but this is what they call the general session, or the general assembly area, and this is where you do these things. And why is that? Why do you think you're looking around and there's all these people doing the exact same thing? It's peer pressure. I mean, think of it. You're a female. Are you going to, guess what? They say it's optional. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. But what's the reality? If I don't do this, I'm not getting married today. Wow. All the wedding invitations have been sent. The party's tonight, right? So who's going to say no on their wedding day? So you just kind of go along with it. In my case, I looked around and saw, well, yeah, my brothers are doing this. My bishop's here. This must be okay. I guess I just don't understand, because that's how they couch it. Oh, there's so much symbolism. You just don't, you got to pray that you understand. Well, I didn't understand any of it. That's not the first one. There's several you do. Like
so much symbolism of
the next one is
getting your throat.
Here's the penalty of the second one. We agree to have our breasts cut open and our hearts and our vitals torn out from our bodies and given to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field.
And this is something that everybody says
Everybody
together.
does, yes.
That is...
If you're... Back then, now, if you were worthy, you did this.
Right.
And you don't just do it once. Every time you go, it's the same exact rituals.
And this is every time you go into the temple.
Every
which
single
is
time.
How frequently would on average?
You should be going once a month to be
Oh, wow.
worthy. Yeah. It's like you get to the point where you almost have this stuff memorized.
And you're just saying this over and over and over again.
Over and over. Every time I went.
Wow. And
Yeah.
that, I imagine, has an impact on you, on the way that you think, on even, I know having conversations with you, you've asked, how did I even get to the point where I was okay with doing that?
How did I get to the point where, number 3, should we do so? This is the third penalty. We agree that our bodies be cut asunder in the midst and that all our bowels gush out.
And you're making this promise in front of everybody.
Yes.
When
And you're
you're
raising your right hand.
And you're
then-
saying this out loud.
Yes. Well, they repeat it, but then they say, well, raise your right hand, bow your head, and say yes, basically, that you agree to this.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, circling back to the first thing that you saw on TV, the documentary of the two brothers slit the throat of their sister.
Yeah, they were instituting this penalties. They
was coming
felt
back to this.
Yeah, and
Wow.
that's why it was so traumatic for me, because I instantly thought of the temple ceremony when I heard
Right.
his interview, and I was
Wow.
like, well, wait a minute. And that's what his story was about. What kind of culture would have two brothers decide to slit the throat of the sister, right?
Wow.
Because she was questioning, and I mean, go watch the documentary. It's fascinating. It's just out right now.
Yeah.
But-
I haven't seen it, but
John Krakauer wrote a book called Under the Banner of Heaven. That's the book that I ended up reading. That's, I started learning all this. Well, I knew the temple stuff, but I didn't know the history and the culture of Mormonism.
Yeah.
And my own history of my religion that I so dearly loved, that I willingly went to Honduras for.
Yeah.
And preached, the only true gospel, right? This is the only true gospel they claim. And so, I remember the first day I looked around in that temple and I was doing this thing, and I just had this weird feeling inside of me, if I'm being truthful, right? Being authentic. That was weird, but I suppressed those emotions because I wanted it to be true. I wanted it all. Right? Because that was my way of life. It had to be true. I was always told, this is truth. This is truth. This is truth.
And that was before. I mean, you didn't do that stuff before you went on your mission.
Oh, yeah, you do.
Oh, you do it before you go on the mission?
Yeah.
Okay.
You do it once. And then they send you off on this 2-year mission, and you're like, well, that was weird, but I'll just...
At least I'm in Honduras.
I'll just go on my mission. And it's when the missionary field indoctrinates you. It's where you get your training. First of all, they're the greatest salesmen. I mean, you can knock on every door, and you really learn to take rejection well.
Yeah.
Right. So imagine that. But you go, and that's they all wear the same thing: white shirt, dark pants, have the name tag. You always have a companion. It's if you study anything about religious cults, it fits like almost nearly identical every single category. If you take the 15 categories of cults, and it's all about, and you said it before, Daryl, it's control. It's all about control. In Mormonism, it's, if you go to that fast and testimony meeting, it goes, a typical testimony will be that they'll start off just like this. I'm like, this is so fun to do. Go to a Mormon fast and testimony meeting and do subjects like on a little piece of paper. I used to do this for fun. Okay, they're going to talk about Joseph Smith, the church being true, there's a prophet today, the Book of Mormon is true. And you just start tallying, like each person, what they say, and you see which category gets the most.
Because it's always just those things.
Yeah.
So it's not really,
It's always the same thing. But we can talk another day what we're really missing there. But in that case, it's the church is true. Notice it's the church that's true.
Right.
Right. It's the church has the ordinances that saves you. Without those ordinances, sorry, Daryl, Aaron, you are not going to make it, because you didn't do the ordinances. You don't know the secret handshakes that I do. I know the secret handshakes. You guys don't, okay? And
there's legitimately 4 secret handshakes.
There's 4 secret handshakes
to get into heaven.
Yeah, and they go along with these penalties, and just by me talking about it, you know, I'm subject to the penalties.
Wow.
And then, like, I was asked, well, do they actually do that? Like, slit people's throats? Well, why do they have you do the oath? Why would you even do it then? Why did the Lafferty brothers slit the throat of their sister? I mean, yeah, they'll say, well, they were not faithful member. That's outside the teaching. Well, the problem is the teaching is fundamental, and people take it as literal. And so these 2 guys slit the throat, and so he wrote a book on it. And yeah, scary stuff. And think about what that does to your mental. Okay, so getting back to your wedding day, who's going to say no when there's 1,000 people in a room, and it's your like fiance is like, you can look over and see him, and he's doing it.
Right.
Okay, just you go along. It's pure pressure. Yeah. And then you do it so much it just becomes routine. And then it's like, then if you start questioning, it's like, well, no, you need to, pray that you'll understand better. You just don't understand yet. Okay, well, who's going to explain it to me? Because this is some wild, crazy stuff.
Who's going to help me understand?
Why can't you help me understand?
Exactly. But nobody can. Right?
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to talk about it outside the temple. So who are you going to ask? Oh, we can't talk about that. It's sacred, they say.
Right, yeah.
Well, no, it's actually secret, not sacred. But they've coined that term. Sacred, so you think it's special, so you won't question.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's scary. And then what that does to you mentally.
Yeah.
And for me personally, like, after I'd left Mormonism, it was like, how did I allow myself to do those things? Like, you start questioning in my case, I began to question my ability to even understand anything, what truth is. Because I'm like, well, if I could do this stuff, man, what, and so then it's like, well, how did the Jonestown people end up committing, mass suicide?
What is the Jonestown people?
That's the Kool-Aid stuff, basically.
Drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's just an example. You have cults all over, and they're, you said it, Daryl, was about control. And so when we put our control in, when we give over our control to man or an organization, religion, that it can become dangerous.
Yeah.
So, I've got all my closest friends are Christian, right? But they have a hard time understanding why I'm like, no,
right.
I'm not going to join this organization or that. Even when I was leaving Mormonism, I looked for a church. I had a wife and 3 kids I was raising. It's like, okay, we're leaving Mormonism, but what else is there?
Right.
And so, yeah.
And so you were okay with, you walked away from the Mormon church, but you still had something that thought it would be good to be part of
I believed in God.
a church. Right. Okay.
I just no longer believe that Joseph Smith was going to stand at the entrance and I had to give secret handshakes to the angels to get in. I didn't believe that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And I gave that up. But no, I didn't want to give up believing in God.
Right.
Yeah.
But eventually you did.
I did. Yeah.
So after you left the Mormon church, and you went to, and I'm sure there's more even to talk about what happened in the Mormon church, but then you went to a Christian church. You found a Christian church.
I went to many.
Okay.
Yeah. I started, like, they call them church hoppers, I guess. I was looking for something, and I settled. I've got lots of friends, so I don't want to say the church, but I started going to a church regularly that drew me in. I felt I was being drawn into it. And if I'm being authentic, I don't know if I was just looking for a replacement for Mormonism, but probably, yeah. I needed something for my family that was starting to fall apart. And don't know. I think I was looking for that security that a church, going to a church offers.
Even like what you had when you were a little kid, whenever your mom was a single mom, and
that
coming into the Mormon
Mormonism,
church and bringing.
It's not all bad. I know I'm talking about horrible parts, but there is, they talk a lot about family unit and some beautiful things that are extremely attractive. I mean, it's super easy to convert somebody to Mormonism. Like, I could do it very easily. You want me to try? Yeah. Okay, let's try for a minute. Well, you're married, Daryl, so I'm going to work on you. So, Daryl, you love Brittany, right?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, wouldn't you want to live with her forever?
Yeah.
You can, but you have to be married by the right priesthood of God. And if you are, you're promised eternal marriage. And Christianity doesn't offer that, right? Because it's death to you're married till
you're not
death.
married at all.
Right. So let's take that and flip it 180 and let's say, well, Daryl, you want to be with Brittany forever, don't you? And you're like, yeah, who wouldn't, right?
Right.
And so your mindset's, I'm going to agree with this.
Like, this sounds good.
And it sounds great. And you know what? Christianity doesn't offer that. So this is appealing. And that's the family units. They have a little saying, families are forever. And it's on, if you walk into any Mormon home, it's stitched on this picture that's on the wall. And next to it will be the temple. And there'll be probably a picture of the family all dressed in white.
And that's not just a cute saying. It's actually literally families being together forever.
And it's such a beautiful thought, right? And so it's very appealing. So, that's the lesson the Mormon missionaries give you when they show up. They don't tell you about the temple. Right? And they don't tell you about all these other teachings. You don't give them the meat before the milk. Give them milk first. Cold.
Yeah.
So they'll use things that appeal to us as humans, right? And that who doesn't love their spouse and doesn't want to be married to them? Well, a lot of people don't. but
Yeah. I was thinking that might not work on some people. They're like,
right?
No way.
I'm actually looking forward to the death.
Yeah, I'm actually very looking forward to death do us part.
Right. But for me, that was appealing, right? And when you're taught that, since you're a little kid and you're singing little songs in church about families are forever, wow, right? So I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving up that. Yeah. And so it's hard. So they use things to appeal. But for me, I started looking for another church to replace Mormonism.
And your wife was okay with that?
Yeah,
because she was Mormon too.
She was, and she was, faithful Mormon. We went to the temple all the time. Like every the truth is, Mormons, their marriages are just as broken as anybody else. They just don't admit it. But you fight, you argue, all.
Can women teach?
Well, yes and no. Women can teach women classes, but women can't have the priesthood. And that's the difference. It is a very male-dominated church, and it's ran by men. And the reality is, you, as a female, you can't be saved without your husband.
Because he's in the priesthood, and you have to get married
Well, it's more than that. And then we'll go to symbolic of the temple. Part of the ceremony is to have this big white curtain that goes across the entire room. And it represents the veil before you enter God's kingdom. And on the other side is God. Okay? And so they have a man who stands on the other side who represents God. And you're going to enter his kingdom. And they have these, think of it of a big sheet that's probably goes up floor to ceiling, and it's across the entire auditorium. And you can probably have 30 or 40 people at it at once. And they do it this way, actually. You come down to the front as part of the ceremony. And if you're male, you go first. There's symbolism in this. So think of the symbolism. You go through, and when you're standing at the veil, guess what you have to give?
4 handshakes.
The 4 handshakes. And you have to give the names, And you have to do it word for word, exactly correct. And if you don't do it exactly correct, they correct you. And they make you repeat it until it is correct. You don't pass through. The handshakes have to be exactly right. The names have to be given exactly right. But if you can do that and you go enough where you memorize it, oh yeah, I got this down. So the problem is when you go through, now you're in God's kingdom, and your wife then comes to the veil and she has to give them to you. And you pass through that way. You call her into heaven. So marriage is very important to Mormons.
Yeah.
And
can you be saved if you're not married?
God will provide in the afterlife.
That's the idea.
That marriage is, to be a God, you have to be married. And you can be married to multiple wives in heaven. So, like Joseph Smith was.
Okay.
And Brigham Young. Brigham Young had 55 wives.
Wow.
He's a busy guy. 55,
Jeez.
I can't handle one, right?
That's how he started the university. So, yeah.
Well, there's reasons. They have reasons for it. They teach that God put this polygamy to raise up a generation quickly to establish his church now. Mm. Joseph Smith established the church, which they will teach is the original church set up by Jesus, but everybody got it wrong, and it's called the apostasy. And then the priesthood was taken from the earth, they say. And it's the priesthood that Peter, James, and John had, they claim. And then they claim Peter, James, and John appeared to Joseph Smith, another vision, and gave him the priesthood. So that's how the Mormon church claims they have the true and only priesthood.
Right.
And you guys don't have it.
Yeah. And so from within the Mormon church, any other declarative faith that follows Jesus has it wrong.
Yes.
And does not have the whole picture.
The teaching that I learned, and I say it because I don't know if they still teach it, but every church is an abomination before God, except for the Mormon church. But that doesn't sit very well, does it, with people? So they kind of back away. But if you go read the writings of the prophets, I mean, they teach this stuff about blacks, and they teach it about polygamy, and they teach it about these aren't things I'm making up, but they've whitewashed their history. Somebody told me that now their lesson manuals talks about Brigham Young, but they don't say he had multiple wives. They just talk about him being married to one wife. Well, that's deceptive in my mind, right? Deception. Yeah. So, but yeah, Joseph Smith was married to, I'm going to get the number wrong, so I'm not going to guess, but there were, as young as 14,
wow.
sister and mother combos. And
wow.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
So maybe before, because I'm guessing we're going to have a part 2 on this guy. We're an hour and a half in here.
Are we really?
We're an hour and a half in.
We're just scratching the surface.
I know, we're just scratching the surface. Maybe to just talk a little bit about the disillusionment. So we've talked a lot about Mormonism. I know that you had a stint of maybe Christianity after that brought about more church hurt.
More disillusionment.
More disillusionment, yeah. But just to talk about, where you at, and then in the next part, maybe we can chat about your journey back to faith and back to God. And
I still have Mormon friends, and I love them dearly. And what I'm saying hurts them. I get that, but what they don't understand is the hurt I've gone through. Right?
Yeah.
That this church that they so claim is truth, and that they love so much, that I did claim was true, and that I loved and still do love in many regards, but the pain it brought is unbelievable. The mental anguish, the second guessing when you start realizing that the stuff I've been learning is just can't be true. Like, not logically it can't, and then you start, we can pick apart theology logically if we want, but that's not the point of this. The point is, when you realize there's a problem, the psychological impact on you is enormous. And I struggled. In fact, I ended up losing my faith in God completely as a result of it, which, church hurt has different terminologies, but I think it's bigger than just getting offended by a pastor and somebody leaving an organization.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I wasn't offended. I learned things that didn't sit well, and then when I did leave, I lost everything, the culture, all my friends, even family members, telling me I had the devil in me.
Yeah.
But
And that's got to have a psychological impact on you.
it did at the time. Yeah, we're close now. We talk all the time, but at the time it was very difficult for me because I was going through it.
Right.
And okay, so you have the person who gets offended, or their pastor didn't do something they thought they should have. Okay, and they get offended and leave, versus somebody a little more extreme gives up their faith, and even more extreme. Then you have people who go through just horrible anxiety and depression, and some people even think there's no better alternative, and they end up committing suicide. I mean, it happens over church, which is the extreme case of somebody who's been traumatized. Who would do that? You say, well, if you have a church that teaches there's no hope for you, let's say you have homosexuality issues, right? And your church teaches you have no chance for salvation. That's that might be a flesh. We would say that's, satisfying the flesh maybe, right? But that in that church, there's BYU is flooded with people who are homosexual, and the church has a big problem on their hands because they ostracize you rather than welcome you. And they say, no. But the reality is, if you were struggling with that, you might think there's no hope, there's no alternative. And so the suicide rate among teens in Utah is high. There's a reason for it, because they have no hope, they have no alternative.
Right.
And so that's the psychological damage in organization. It's extreme. It goes from just being offended and walking out or finding a new church, to somebody who decides there's no other alternative, and they take their life, which is just the worst struggle I can imagine, for somebody. So it's damaging. For me personally, when I looked around at Christianity, you brought up, Aaron, it's like I was, finding doctrinal issues with things people were teaching me, like, I'm going to burn in hell if I don't pay tithing. Well, okay, is that really the Christian teaching? Right? But that's what I was hearing. Not Mormons teach that, but that's what I was also hearing at some churches I was going to. I heard things like, we have the truth. It's our church only that these are Christian churches in mainstream Christianity, and the preacher saying, no, we have the truth, and there's other churches around here don't have it. Well, that's an we versus them mentality. It separates, and that's, to me, was a red flag. And so, does God create people for destruction? That's tough. That's tough when I heard that from the pulpit. So for me, I rejected, and then I lost my complete faith in God as a result. I'm like, okay, I tried Mormonism for too long, now this isn't sitting well, and then boom, I lost it. And I've lived the last 15, 20 years not believing in God.
Yeah.
Not only did I not believe in it, like I went and found arguments to really support God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because I was an auditor. I'm not just going to not believe, I'm going to go prove it now.
Right.
So I did.
Wow.
Yeah. And I would be extreme. Like I'd go and hear a pastor give a sermon, and then I would go transcribe it and write 40 pages why he is wrong.
Wow.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah, I had a good close friend hand me a CD, and he knows who he is. He'll probably listen to this. But he handed me a CD, and it was of an Easter passage, and I listened to it, and I'm like, okay, this. I can't just let this go. It requires a response. So I transcribed it, and I wrote paragraph by paragraph, 40 pages, why that pastor was wrong. And I handed it back to him. I said, well, I listened to your CD. Now you read my writing. So I was like, all right. So yeah, I didn't believe. I lost my faith completely. And okay, what's the damage of that? Wow, that changes your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
It changes your worldview. And so, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Yeah.
But yeah.
This
isn't a bash on Mormonism today. It's more the psychological damage that organizations can do. Mormons aren't alone in this.
Yeah.
I mean,
this is a part of I mean, there's stuff in our history. There's stuff in what we've done. There's ways that we've operated in our own church that have, or that people have operated in our church that have been very similar or operated out of control or, or have said things to people that are just like, what are you doing? You know, and so it's, I don't think it's a bash more. I'm interested in Mormonism because I've only ever read about it. I haven't met somebody who's a part of it, but I think really, what we're trying to get to the bottom of is, man, what are we doing as organizations or as faith communities to really love on people and mitigate some of this stuff, and then I love our place because I think that the questions are open,
because people experience hurt when they have questions. Something comes up or they hear something and they're like, that doesn't make sense, or they discover something or hear something, and then the fundamentals of what they were standing on seem to be questioned, and then they go ask somebody that they feel like they trust, or a pastor or a friend who's another Christian, and oftentimes too many more than it should be, the response is just have faith, or just pray. You're depressed, just pray about it, and the depression will go away. And like these out of the box responses that don't actually help the person come to a point of resolving the questions that they had, or come to the point of being able to reconcile, what is this? Why is this seem like it's this way, but you said this, or I heard this, or this happened and this doesn't make sense. People have that hurt because they're rejected, and left to be alone.
Mormonism is not the only church that booted me. I've gone to Christian churches and basically been asked not to come back because I asked too many questions.
Wow. Right.
Yeah, and so that's been part of my journey that we haven't we'll probably delve into next time. But so it is. It's not limited to a single organization, and they mean well, but I think it's having our own faith challenged is what it should be strengthened.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not solid in your faith, then when you get challenged, it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Yep.
But the truth will stand on its own.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. And so
you kind of have to let everything else, I'm sure, after that after that experience, or all of these experiences. I know you said, how do you even trust yourself? I got duped.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I've been a part of this for so long. And then this is what we talked about with Rachel in one of our previous episodes was too, is she let go of everything, you know? It's like, even the most fundamental beliefs, it's like, I mean, you went to the point of God doesn't exist, maybe,
right. No, I did.
Yeah. And
I had to.
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
she was like, maybe God's not good. Maybe, you know what I mean?
Right.
She said, like, I have no idea, because you kind of have to hold those things and just be like, I don't know, you know?
I still have some carrots we haven't talked about. But for me, God was a monster that deserved the very hell I was being condemned to.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a nugget for
that's
episode 2. But I mean, if we have time today, we'll keep going. But I had to tear everything down, every single teaching, and just let it go, because I didn't know what was right anymore. Like, what is truth?
Right.
I mean, Pilate was asked, what is truth?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, you know, the story goes, Jesus didn't answer that question. There's a reason, right? He couldn't handle what the truth would have been. But, yeah, I've had to ask that. What is truth? And what, down to the basic level, does God even exist? Who is God?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? If he does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And those, going from being a Mormon missionary to questioning who is God, that the whole process was a mental anguish that just, it's taken me years. I'm 54.
Yeah.
Still haven't figured out who God is, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I never will, but I'm just glad I'm not going to become a God. He's too
It's too complicated.
right.
Too much responsibility.
Too much responsibility.
I thought that's what I wanted, but that is not what I want.
No, right. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk more,
Yeah.
but I'm also thinking about editing this video, and I don't want to edit a 3-hour video. So maybe in chunks. But yeah, I think next time we'll get into some more maybe details of the healing journey that I know you're still on, but some of those things as they came about, what you had to reconstruct after the deconstruction, you know, and how that came about. Would love to hear about, you know, your wife and how that all happened, and maybe if that's a part of the faith journey.
She is a part of my journey for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I would love to hear about that stuff. But thank you for this.
No.
Yeah, for spending almost 2 hours with us.
It didn't seem like 2 hours.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And all of our boggies out there. Be looking out for part 2 with Chris Anderson.
I've got some carrots we haven't talked about, so I'm going to save them for next
some
time.
nuggets. Okay,
no, they're more than nuggets, but yeah.
Some carrots.
Yeah,
I like that. Okay,
gotta return.
I didn't know if you meant orange carrots or actual carrots, like diamond carrots.
Well, I think they're diamonds.
Okay, all right, yeah. All right. Well, we love you guys. Make sure to follow us on all platforms: Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, even TikTok. Get on there, and we'll see you next time on Your Brain on God. Peace out.